Hey everyone, welcome to Business Uncomplicated. I'm your host, Rich Nazaro, and we want to welcome you on this journey as we delve into the world of podcasting. This is a new series for us. We just launched it, and throughout the weeks, we're going to bring you really interesting guests, and we're going to talk about what it's like to be in the world of tech, in the world of business and leadership, and the challenges that come along with that, and also the rewards and benefits. We have an excellent lineup of guests, of people we've worked with, people we've known, people we've met along our ways, and the journey they've had and the experience they had, and they're going to share it all with you. So I really want to make sure that you guys get value out of this. So we've asked all our guests to really give us practical advice to some of the biggest challenges that they've solved. And I'm sure as you listen to them, you'll hear very similar stories and very similar challenges. And hopefully the advice and the feedback they give really is going to allow you to think about how you problem solve and how you deal with the challenges that you may come across and the solutions that are really practical that you can apply to your business tomorrow. So in a world where we're drowning in complexity, we really want to find smart strategies, simple solutions, to have real conversations about tech, leadership, and how to be successful in this crazy world and cut through the noise. Let's be really honest about what we need. So we've built this technology to move fast, right? When you talk about technology and we think about why we implement technology, it's to solve a business problem. And we go really fast, right? Every time you buy a piece of software, if you've been on the IT side, you hear people say, oh, I got to implement that. What time to implementation, time to value? Where are we going to get the return on this investment? The reality along this journey is we forget the why sometimes. We forget that 70% of digital transformations fail, and how to build a system that actually works for the business and actually drives results for your business. And that is just not about technology. And so we want to talk a lot about that. And you'll hear this theme throughout these shows and throughout our conversations or our blogs or, our TikToks. Wherever we post, we always have this same kind of theme around business process and technology and the intersection. And whether we're talking about SaaS or digital transformation or AI, this theme always comes back to technology as an enabler to help you be successful. I'll say that again. Technology is not the answer, it's the enabler. So today, we're going to talk with Ken Chu, who's an amazing technologist and has gone from enterprise to environmental impact and proves that tech not only can scale, but tech has a purpose and can serve a very specific purpose in life. So we're glad you're here. We're really excited to have Ken with us today. So hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get going.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So as we get started here, I always want to remind people of the mission of Business Uncomplicated. And really our mission here is to empower businesses with insights, strategies, actionable outcomes that really drive growth without really sacrificing quality. And we want to cut through all the proverbial noise and again offer these practical solutions to modern business challenges because these challenges are changing every day in our world. When we think about whether you're an entrepreneur or a business leader, a CEO, a person who's just tech savvy and loves technology and really just wants to create this new world for themselves. We want to bring you these experts and these conversations and these success stories and these real world tactics to help you drive efficiency within your world. It's no surprise that everything in business comes down to dollars and cents. It comes down to profit. Either you're making money or you're losing money. And a lot of that has to do with the pieces in between, the process, the technology, and how this all works together. And stripping some of that to its rawest form and putting it back together in a very cohesive way is really important. So our mission here is to help you kind of navigate all that through these conversations with these great leaders. So before we introduce our guest, I wanted to start today with really what the theme is. And it's a really powerful theme, and it's a really important question, is what the point of all this tech if It's not making things better for a human. We'll talk about AI in this podcast, and there's a lot of people who say AI is going to take my job and AI is going to take over the world. And listen, I'm not going to mince words. AI is doing amazing things, and it's really making these crazy advancements every day. And what it was a year ago is so much more dramatic than what it is here. But the reality is, there's still a human component to life. There's still a human component to business and to technology. And so for years, business has been sold this gospel of digital transformation, whether it was cloud first, AI powered, data driven, SaaS, you name it. There's always been this reinvention. From my time at Salesforce, they'd say, it's the next generation, the next evolution of this. And it's true. We are evolving technology. We're evolving our society. We're solving problems. But somewhere along the way, we're kind of losing sight of why we're doing it. And it's sometimes the reason why we're not successful, or most of the reason why we're not successful. So when you think about it, nearly 70%, 70% of transformation efforts fail to meet their intended goal. That's from the Boston Consulting Group, a very well known consulting group who does some amazing work. And it's not because the tech didn't work, right? It's not because the people weren't set up for success. The systems weren't aligned. The culture wasn't ready. The implementation skipped the human part. And while we talk about change management a lot within large transformational projects, it's not just about changing the way people work, it's changing the hearts and minds of how they work. And while we chase the data and the automation, the real cost starts showing up. It's the burnout, it's the misalignment, it's the waste of resource, it's the implement something and nobody's adopting it. So if you think about the companies out there and what they're doing, Kinsey recently did a study. On average, companies use 130 SaaS applications, 130. That is an enormous amount of applications. And the reality of those applications is only a fraction of them are being used beyond the surface level. So when you think about buying all these features and when you're in the buying process, you have this amazing epiphany like, wow, this is going to transform how we do it. But somewhere between the buying process and the implementation process, we kind of lose steam. We lose that alignment and we lose why we purchased the system and never really take advantage of those features, whether we run out of budget, whether the change management becomes too hard, or whether it's just not hitting the mark. It never rockets past that launch pad. And so, when you look at all this stuff, adoption becomes a real problem. And it requires this fusion of like tech skills and human capability that most orgs aren't developing fast enough. They're not keeping pace with the technology, and people are falling behind, and then the technology isn't living up to its ROI, which is at the end of the day what it's all about. So I want to say this because I said it in the intro, is technology is not the solution, it's the enabler. And it always kind of frustrates me the way people look at technology sometimes, because they look at it as it's going to solve the problem. Well, it's not. It is only going to help either the problem be solved and get better, or it's going to cause more dysfunction. And as you implement it, if you don't have a purpose, and this purpose is beyond the initial usage. So at times there will be these large transformational projects, which maybe be 6 months, a year and a half, and they have these lofty goals, and you have a project plan, you might hire an SI, and you hit all these milestones. Once you hit those milestones, then you get to okay, let's run the business with it, the steady state. And you stop evolving, you stop having a roadmap beyond that. And you don't get to progress, and you get complexity at scale. And so it starts becoming noise, and it starts be shifting from the real result of why you intended to buy the software to this, well, it's not delivering what it needs. And so you kind of start then rethinking and re-engineering. So here's the shift we want to talk about. It's human first innovation, right? Tools that serve people, not replace them. Systems designed to empower and not confuse people. Platforms that help your team do the best work, not just tick boxes in a dashboard. And these are really great kind of high level statements, but it's because when tech isn't really driven by clarity and values and real world outcomes, it doesn't scale. It's just operational. That's why today we really want to talk about tech with purpose and human innovation in a hyper digital world, right? We can't get away from it. Like this innovation, especially with AI, seems to be everywhere and transforming our businesses and pulling out cost and making it streamlined and more profitable seems to be this constant theme and drumbeat across it. So today we've invited somebody who's been building systems before digital transformation was a LinkedIn trend, and he's worked for some of the industry's giants like Dell, Salesforce. He now runs his own company called Dagmar Labs, and he's led teams across continents. I mean, he really is this global influencer, and he's fluent in all these technologies. But he also has a passion around technology. He also brings technology to life through his personal endeavors to protect marine ecosystems. He's proof that when you build technology with intention, you can go far beyond the efficiency, and you can serve the planet, and it can unlock purpose, and it can scale you. So if you're drowning in platform, debating about the next technology investment, or just trying to align your teams around something real, this episode is for you. Because the future isn't just digital, the future is human and enabled by digital done right. So sit back, enjoy the show, and let's get to our guest. Hey, Ken, welcome to Business Uncomplicated. How you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks, Rich, for having me today.
Yeah? How's the weather in Hong Kong?
It's actually warming up.
Yeah.
I think it's in the region of 70, 80 degrees.
Nice. Well, we're extremely excited to have you here. We've been hyping you up. And so, full transparency, we've known each other longer than I think both of us want to admit. Our history goes back to our Dell days, which we had a lot of fun. I remember falling in a river in Kuala Lumpur on a hike, where I got a lot of flack for that, but not what we're going to talk about today. But we're really excited to have you here, and one of the things we've been kind of talking about in the introduction is the really human side of technology, right? And this idea that tech has a purpose, and that purpose is really an enabler, that technology isn't the solution, right? But how you apply technology and how you use technology is really becoming more important, especially, I believe, as we move into this AI world that we're all kind of venturing into, struggling with, embracing, wherever you sit on that. And so I really wanted to have a conversation with you because I find you to be somebody who inserts tech into everything they do, right? Technology isn't just your job, it's your passion. From the conservation work you do to the work you do with your clients, you've always just kind of taken a very technology-centric approach. But I think over your career, it hasn't been the technology that's led you, but the purpose behind the technology. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. Technology is just a tool, right? And if we are to actually make change, then we are not focusing just on the tool itself, but actually the purpose, the mission or the problem statement behind it.
Yeah. And you've worked for a lot of companies that have had a lot of lofty missions, right? Like, I mean, Dell was, at the time we worked, there was a $60 billion company. We had the largest implementation of Salesforce at the time. You were managing across multiple products, business units, you name it. People know Dell. It's a household name. You worked at Salesforce alongside me. We both were there, and Salesforce, it wasn't the startup when we got there. It was the behemoth it is today, a multi-billion-dollar company. And you worked with clients to help implement Salesforce at a lot of places. So you've kind of seen this thing from owning it in-house and also helping customers be successful with it as a consultant within your career. So I want to talk about that. So let's kind of start kind of with your career and where you started, and give people a little bit of background and insight into who you are. So, if you look back in your career, you've worn every hat from developer to IT architect. And you've seen a lot of things change over the years. So, kind of summarize the last 20 years in your opinion and your career of like, what have you seen as the biggest shift? Like what has been the biggest kind of, movement that you've seen across your career?
Yeah, when you put it like that, right, it seems like it's been so long ago since you actually started, right, or actually started working in the tech space. Yeah, in terms of the corporations and the companies, the large companies that we have worked with, right, the teams in the past, it has always been large teams. It's not easy to ramp up. You need to
Yeah.
hire quite a number of people and then train them. And then they are sort of like specialized. Currently, as we go on in the last 10, 20 years, we have shifted from, say, silos of teams to a very more generalized team. So you have people who are generalists. They're expected to be Swiss Army knife. You shouldn't be just knowing one technology stack per se, but
Right.
actually, yeah, knowing everything around it, integrations and things like that, because technology come and go, right? And then we see the shift from self-hosted large systems in-house to cloud. And then they decide that, okay, there are caveats that is and limitations and also a cost that comes in the component, right, for putting everything in cloud. And then now they're moving back to like hybrid kind of solutions.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that the kind of oscillation of like, hey, we need these big data centers in controlling them. I remember my first day at Dell as a consultant. They said this little computer under the desk runs our CRM system, and we're like, what? And then here we are. We're gonna put you in the cloud. we're gonna make that easier for you.
Yeah.
But you're saying now it's like this kind of maybe not to a computer under the desk, but back to servers in the office.
Yeah, so to I mean either the term private cloud, right? So you basically it is still interconnected or even but then it will be hosted or controlled by the organization themselves rather than everything on. So in
Yeah.
terms of the cost, sometimes there's a sticker cost, right? Or sort of like a shock.
Right.
Usually when a company start to ramp up and then the costs run away.
Yeah. And ROI is a big part of this, right? Like, I mean, I had talked about this in the introduction. I mean, the enabler of the technology and the intersection of process. And I said we talk about that a lot on our social channels and on our blogs and to our clients is this intersection of process technology. And at the end of any software purchases, what's the ROI? What am I getting out of it? So you've worked on some major projects, like really large projects. And given your technology background, like what really stretched you? Like as you think about your career and you think about kind of how did you get to where you are through, I want to say, the challenges of some of these bigger projects?
Yeah. I have to actually dig back, right? But then there are
Yeah.
many projects, and I think throughout the years, a lot of them are like really big, multinational, regional-led kind of projects. And I think one example actually pops up, and it is actually a regional-led cloud marketing and CRM project for a financial institution, right, or in the insurance space. And I find that the problem usually is not the tech; it is usually the requirements or the diverse cultures between countries and also the regulations and the business processes that are different basically, and then you are trying to then have an unified way to deploy similar functionalities to different places, and then you find that you
Right.
get stuck.
Yeah. And that's interesting because I mean, I remember when we were going through the Dell implementation back in the day, one of the things when we implemented it's like it had to be legal, regulatory, or like some kind of
Compliance.
specific sales regional difference, right? Like
Correct.
the idea around these big projects was to make it more, kind of consistent, right? But to your point is what's really driving the success of the project or the success of the platform is the business process, which in these large multinational programs is different when you do something in Hong Kong versus the United States versus Japan.
Yeah, I'll give a very good example of the challenge that we had, and that nearly derailed that particular project that I was in. At that time, this was like we are talking about the 2012, 2015. cloud is all in the rage, but the regulatory bodies have not caught up. So that means there's a lot of things like your data can't be stored outside of the country, or there's a certain security measures that they are measuring based on on-premise kind of standards, right? And then they try to apply that on the cloud as well. And this has been crazy. We had to work. And the other problem is actually internally, you have compliance teams who are telling you you can't do this because it's not written in the rule book yet. Yeah. So those are the challenges. The way to actually push through this is actually going in, working with them, actually reading the multilingual regulatory documents, and then finding that actually there is a way to then use the technology to mold around that. We worked with the central banks of Malaysia, the regulatory bodies of Singapore, and also Indonesia and Philippines. And then finally, after a significant overhead and some delay, at least it went live, and the system is still alive and thriving right now.
Still alive and thriving. And that's interesting because, as we talk about it here, it really is that intersection of business process. And what you're talking about is this compliance. And so people, when they do these programs, they don't think like, well, this is a technology program, but technology consumes data. Data has privacy to it because you have customer data or PPI data or PII data, excuse me. And so there's a lot of things that swirl around this, right? And it's I look at it as it's the culture of the business, the culture of the industry. And so you've worked for large companies like Salesforce and AXA, Dell, and they're high performing environments. So what do they get right about technology and what's the misses? Like, because what you're talking about here is sometimes those compliance, they can come and derail the entire project, right? And so how do we work around kind of that, and what's the secret there? Because you know it.
Yeah. So there's not actually rocket science to this, right? Based on
Come on, it's super complicated.
yeah. The philosophy behind this is that I notice, and this is from my personal experience, is that if a project is usually driven from the IT side, without much input from the business side, then we are actually setting ourselves up for failure, because you usually go for like a very shiny new technology and then you try to implement it, and then you push this processes from we are sitting in a corporate HQ somewhere, and then we're trying to push these processes to people who are actually working with customers day to day. And then they do not have a say or an input into what we are doing, and chances are that's gonna sort of like fail, right? We need to get the business, and over the years, I did see some of these companies actually. And when I talk about customers, it's not always an external customer. It can be internal customers as well, the internal users, right? And I see that some of these companies, like Salesforce, like AXA, they sort of like scale in terms of their business. They scale like corporate, right? But then when it comes to their development processes, they kept it agile and like a startup. So the culture there is like you are allowed to sort of like be very fast. And then of course there will be some of these hurdles, like you say, regulations and things like that, right? And then we build that into the processes from the start. So we know the limitations is that, okay, we need to then separate data, which are PII, and we start off with a persona of a user or a customer, and then we segregate the data and also those accesses, right, the permissions, from very start, before even the functionality starts coming in. So we actually put that up first, and then once we get actually the business, they need to be the champions. They are the product owners. They should be part of that project as well. And then over years, I see some of these projects have diverse project teams. They are not like, oh, this is the IT implementation team. This is the whole program, right? It's a program management rather than a project management.
Well, and that's interesting because there's always this kind of challenge I've seen, because I've sat on both sides of the fence. I've sat in the business, I've sat in IT, I've straddled them in a strategy role. And it's funny because there are a lot of business people think it's always an IT-led initiative. Oh, this is a technology project. Yeah. And all the things you kind of talk about go by the wayside because the business isn't bought in, right? And the frustration IT feels is that, like, guys, I'm doing this for you, right? Like I'm not the one selling. I'm not the one, doing this regulatory thing. You are. So when you talk about that and you talk about the culture and you talk about, it really comes down to what I think is leadership.
Mm.
And this is something we'll talk about a lot on this channel. And you and I, I'm sure, will have a lot of good conversations about this. But like, to me, the teams you build is part of your asset, right? It's part of how you are successful. And so you, wearing all the different hats you've had to build these teams, and not only teams regionally or locally, but multinational or multi-global teams, right? So how do you build a high performance team with all these challenges? Like what's kind of been your, philosophy or your approach?
Yeah, definitely building teams are not easy. I mean, dealing with systems is easy compared to actually trying to then put together people who are from diverse cultures and backgrounds, right? I was fortunate because I originate from a very diverse culture. So I work from young with different nationalities, with different ethnicities. And then I find that when I was actually starting out with my career, I start from like a developer kind of level, right? And I see how I would like to be in, or the type of team, the type of energy that I would like to be in, and then to be really honest, during our time in Dell, that was like an amazing time, where no, we actually built. Imagine we grew from what, a handful of people. We
Right.
grew that team to like over 40, and ended up with closer to 100 right now. I mean, we
Right.
have. But the team has been thriving. And one of the key that I think this is, in terms of talent, attracts talent. It comes down to hiring people who are smarter than us. It's not about, you know, having sort of like a team who is, oh, okay, I have 40 people, I have 60 people. It's not a numbers game. But hiring people who are smarter than us, and giving them that autonomy, that actually gives them the freedom to then do their best work.
So, I mean, that's about ego, right? Partly. I mean, right? I mean, let's face it, we've all worked for those bosses who were like, "Oh my God," like this world revolves around them. And I know I was one of them because, but so I mean, when you talk about leadership, and leadership is, I think it's so important, and there's so many different leaders, and you can read every leadership book out there, but it really comes down to human interaction, and I believe chemistry too, right? Like there are certain teams. I will say our team at Dell was very high performing because we meshed, right? We had a common core belief system, that there were a lot of smart people and we let them be smart, right? But what are the mistakes people make? So I will be the first to admit as a leader I made mistakes, and you kind of grow, right? So we've had years to reflect on our leadership follies or leadership successes. So what in the tech world, how do you avoid some of these leadership mistakes, and where have you seen them?
Yeah, so some of the bigger, or more obvious ones is actually ramping a team too fast, right? Or suddenly making a decision on one day, that I'm going to totally outsource the entire team, and this decision just comes like that, and then we just move in that direction, and suddenly that culture that we have built over the years is then either getting diluted, or the new people who comes in doesn't have the same drive or the passion or the mission, right, of the original team that's in. So I think one of the things is that if we are trying to then ramp up too fast, and then we are also committing to some of the hypes and technology, right? We are talking about the technology as a forefront rather than the people who are using it, the people who are developing it. Then you're actually committing to a solution that's looking for problems to solve.
So like let's stop for that for a second, because that's an interesting one, because what I've noticed recently in
Mm.
working, in the environments I've had, and I'd be interested to get your take, is do you feel like compared to 10, 15 years ago that there is a more desire now to just buy multiple technologies and just kind of plug a technology into it versus thinking through a scalable architectural model that actually makes sense for your business?
Yeah, I think actually that strategy makes sense as well, because there's a lot of solutions out there that are already very mature, right? When we talk about moving to cloud, one of the core advantage of that is we do not need to then think about a lot of connectivity. I mean, in terms of the internal
Right.
connectivity, the security control, the compliance. We actually outsource this problem to the provider, right? Because then if something happens, they are the ones who are actually supposed to be then responsible for those kind of things.
Right.
And this comes back to in the differences between 10, 15 years ago when we said when the teams were massive, deliveries were super slow because everything is written in-house. And you are actually reinventing the wheel all those while, right? And then now it's like I don't think anybody even writes from scratch a payment gateway solution. You just subscribe to something and then you integrate it. I think that's a good way to go because then it sort of like enables the business to deliver a lot faster. But there must be a balance there, right? Because that means you have
Right.
to have an architecture that is and standards. So when you evaluate those pieces of software or the services that you are actually subscribing to, we need to make sure of quite a number of and to see if they are compliant in terms of their scale, their other success stories, right? And then we need to know that they are not going to disappear and just shut down overnight, right? Those
Yeah.
are because we don't have control over that anymore. They can just the power of that switch is on the vendor side.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because I've seen it a lot lately with some of the clients I've worked with is that, business is trying to run technology and there's a power to that, right? Because and listen, 20 years ago Salesforce sold to the business. They didn't sell to IT, right? Because they were like, you don't need IT. Fast forward now is IT's right at the epicenter of
Yeah.
Salesforce, right? But it is kind of as we move into AI, I'm wondering if that's really all these point solutions that are AI driven that just connect to this massive data lake that is just pulling and analyzing data, and agents are just running these different processes for you currently. That one technology is just not the way to do it anymore. It's these specialized agents for support and this specialized marketing agent that's going to talk to the support agent that's going to talk to the BDR. It's just kind of an interesting evolution to your point when we went from on-prem to cloud to hybrid to now this AI world where it seems like maybe anything goes and the technology is advancing so rapidly that it's almost like I just implemented this great new agent and they're like, yeah, my agent can double what your agent does, and you're like, wait a minute, I just implemented it, how did this happen?
Yes. Yeah, it just moves so fast, and that means businesses have to be ready for that, right? It's no longer a case of an architecture where we are having point-to-point integrations where different applications which are meshed together, right? It's
Yeah.
about being smart about it, and then you have a layer, an integration layer, where you then have an access to as APIs, right? To all these applications who are coming in, and the
Right.
good thing about this evolution, sorry about that, evolution since the 10 years ago is that now we realize the importance of unifying the data. That's where like data lake comes in, and then the NoSQL comes in, right? The big data, and that's where we start to feed those data, and then how these applications get access to this data, because then the data is not siloed in edge and one of those applications, and whatever new solutions that comes in has to follow that paradigm as well. And so that means if we are to take out one agent and then we put in the next, it should then plug in with minimal effort. I mean,
So,
so
yes, yeah, all
yeah,
those CEOs just heard minimal
that's
effort,
what, yeah,
low
minimal,
cost.
right? But then I'm quantify that. Yeah.
Right. So let's shift a little because what I find really fascinating about you is this use of technology in your personal life, right? Like, so I've known you from the business side, and over the years got to know you personally. And Facebook, I'm constantly amazed. You're diving in the ocean, photographing fish and coral, and then you're got drones in the air, photographing these amazing sceneries. And I was just like, can this guy not do like one thing? He has to do everything really well. And I won't even get started about your amazing children and, the fact that they both just did TED Talks, which I find so fascinating. Technology isn't just like a thing. It's part of your family, right? Like, so talk about the maker culture, and innovation. How did you pivot to technology as a way of life, let's say?
Yeah. I think I started, I mean, I've always been a tinkerer. It was sort of like, sorry.
Yeah, go
It
ahead.
has always been a culture, even from my parents' time frame, right? Because during that time, my mom specifically, she's the maker in the house. If anything
Mm,
is like broken or if there's something in the house improvement or whatever it is, it will be my mom who would actually then go out and do it, right? And I grew up with that. And if my toys get sort of like broken, she's the one who would actually, I mean, with zero electronic or mechanical kind of knowledge, she manages to then to fix them. And that ingrained something in me. Is like, we sort of like use our hands and sort of like the skills that we have to make things, to fix things, rather than, oh, okay, I'm just going to throw this away, I'm going to get something new, right? And
right.
this whole journey actually really started in the year, probably in about 2000. Suddenly got really interested in drones. And that time, drones weren't such mainstream stuff. You
Yeah.
can't actually go off the shelf and buy something so solid like those DJI drones nowadays. I mean, those are like basically they are perfect. They don't have, or I mean, you just buy it off the shelf and the beginner can just start and then just fly it. But during that time, the only access to drones is actually either you get something which is really of low quality or you build yourself a drone. And that's what I did. I actually got a drone off the shelf and then modified to a point where it went beyond the technical limits. And I lost it over water. I lost it over water,
Oh
right?
no.
And yeah, I mean, I put in like hours and hours, and I even have sort of like a build videos on YouTube at that time to sort of like show what modifications I've done to this drone, right? And then the next thing you know, I lost it. I just lost it, right? And that actually sort of like shifted and say like, hey, I'm going to then start building from scratch, right? From all the models, and from there I developed a drone kit for education purposes, and that's where I brought this idea to a makerspace, pitched to them the idea, and then we did a lot of workshops with that makerspace, including doing a 300-person drone building workshop with McKinsey. Basically, we flew all the way to Macau on their yearly business review or an annual general with 300 of their consultants, and we basically built that, right? And from there, we got connected with the conservation or the marine biologists from the universities, and then they started talking about using drones, and they had this hackathon pitching project with students to do conservation projects. And then our team designed. We flew to the Philippines, worked with the team of students, and then we came out with a sort of what they needed, or the idea was that we can then take photos of the corals using an autonomous.
And what was the purpose of taking the photos for the corals? To map it, to
Yeah,
understand it
yeah,
better,
to
like
have like a Google map of corals, right, in the shallow regions. Because the problem statement was that on the more shallow locations, you either it's very hard to get people to go down there to take photos because of is the current the waves, and also the because it is too shallow and boats can't actually go in there unless they will
ah,
damage the corals. So there's this space between the like 20 meters or and then you have this place between 3 and 7 meters. That's where a lot of the hard corals and thrive. And it also costs a lot to send divers in, and humans have that limitation, right? Depends on how much air you bring in. Usually it'll be an hour plus, and then you have to come out, and the cost of transporting all this. And the idea was to have a surface drone that automatically based on a GPS track, it will then go and keep on taking photographs, and we then take these photographs and we stitch it together and then and geolocate it so that then it will become like a Google map kind of thing. And it's interesting now, this is a water drone, right? And my experience with the aerial drones, and we sort of like, hey, actually this same technology will work on the only thing is that instead of moving in 3D space, it's moving in a 2D space. Of course, it's also a 2D because also you will have all the waves, and you have to compensate for that as well.
right.
So what I did was I ripped the controllers, the electronics out of my one of my custom drones, and then we basically went to the village. We built a water boat, a water drone by using just bamboo sticks.
Holy crap.
We slapped the drone motor on it, and then it became like a mini mini autonomous boats made out of bamboo.
I mean, this is very innovative, right? Like, I mean, this is thinking outside the box. This is solving real world problems with bamboo and hardware and software, right? So, like, this whole kind of innovation that you drive, like, you talk about working with McKinsey. You talk about this conservation. So, like, how do companies adopt this? Like, I mean, this isn't something you're going to see in most companies. And of course, most companies don't buy drones and map coral reefs and the ocean. Like, how do you apply that to what you do? I mean, do you, and maybe I'll ask the question this way, is do you often feel like you are not allowed to be innovative in companies, and this maker side of your personality allows that creativity to come out? But could you bring that back into the corporate environment, and if so, how?
I think we don't actively go in to our teams and then we keep on saying, hey, I do a lot of diving, I do all this drone tech and stuff like that. I think the moments that you step away from what you're doing day to day, that means as a job, right? The 9 to 5 job, do it day to day, you solve those kind of problems. But then you have other passions, you step back and then you are doing something else. Think about it, right? Building a drone, building any solution, GPS tagger or those kind of solutions. At the end of the day, is also building blocks. And then you are not building something as a toy, right? You are also interacting with marine biologists, the researchers, the NGOs. So you're actually working with those people. If you think about it, they are also an organization. And then the things that you do, and as a maker, what does it define a maker, right? You can say inventors or something, but a maker is actually all the things that we have discussed in the past 15 minutes, 20 minutes, right, is about taking diverse skill sets, knowledges, building blocks, and then putting them together to solve a problem. We are not there to sort of like reinvent the wheel. So when we go back into corporate setting with that mindset, then it starts to click, because then you are thinking like, hey, I am trying to solve a problem. Then your viewpoint becomes more about asking what is the business pain points. Because a lot of times in transformations, we always ask the businesses, like, hey, so what does success look like to you? What would it be like in that? If this system is up, what are the things that you want in the system? And I can bet you 80% of the time, the users or the people of that system will say like, hey, I want it to look same with my 18-year-old system, legacy system, right? I want the same buttons. I want the same wheel. And I want the same reports. I mean, I want the same reports and things like that. And then you'll be like, okay, so instead of asking them what they want, you start approaching it from the design thinking or the problem statement kind of thing, right? I'm like, okay, so what are your pain points currently? And then we start to design the system around alleviating those pain points rather than trying to asking them, because else all this will still come back, the pain points will still come back, just that it's not going to be at the start of the project, it's going to be during UAT, at the user acceptance test. And then they come back and telling you that, hey, I want this change, I have this change request. And IT becomes defensive, right? Because they have spent a year developing that, and then yeah. So that mindset actually helps. And I have one example. So I actually brought in I was a part of the working group with EXA when I came back, because by the time I worked at EXA, drones started to become more mainstream, and then they had this working group, and in-house, I started looking for these kind of things, right? Either through Slack channels, through Teams and whatnot. And I tried to find pockets of discussions that has something to do with these kind of things. So, and I ended up joining this working group. And we sort of like came up with guidelines and also the possible solutions for them to do drone surveys of evaluations of properties in terms of the claim. So especially during disasters, floods and stuff. So they will sort of like send out drone to do mapping of the entire area, and then map out the addresses where they have customers with policies, right? So that then they can assess the damage, and then when the claims come in, it's easier to then underwrite those claims. And those are some of the things that actually in real world things that happen. Didn't partake in the makers and the drones, I wouldn't be able to then look into this solution as well.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, then it's again technology for a purpose, like your conservation side and your kind of this impact side you have of your technology passion kind of has crossed over into the corporate world, and you were able to, well, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think some people take different career paths, right? So some people are very literal about their, are like, I'm going to be a doctor, and they be a doctor for 30 years and they retire, right? And some people zigzag all over the place and just kind of find passion in like random things. But I think like fusing these two words is the way I would look at it, right? You had this really interest in technology and drones, and that led you to conservation and mapping the coral reefs and becoming a certified diver and getting in the ocean and photographing there. And then you come back to the corporate world and you're like, well, wait a minute, like everything I've learned I can now bring to you. And so your passion just kind of always gets infused in what you do, and it's part of you as a leader. And do you feel like that passion helps fuel the teams you lead? Does it help fuel your get out of bed in the morning with a purpose versus like, I gotta go to work today, you know?
Yeah, I think doing this kind of okay in a large corporate, usually the task that you are assigned to. I mean, I'm talking about like the people who are on the ground who are actually doing the implementations, or even the business side who are actually focusing on it. They have a sort of like a view of, okay, so this is the process. I'm following this process. I'm doing this, and at the end of the day, I'm done. And it's sort of like some after a while, you sort of like lose that passion, not to say the passion, but then the sort of like the purpose, right? Your purpose is that task. It's not the bigger picture of it. But when you are actually doing something outside that's meaningful, working with NGOs, and you see all these things, and then suddenly the day-to-day problems that you actually face in your work or task suddenly seem small compared to the problems that the world is actually facing right now. And I think that gives me that kind of a muscle memory when I actually to sort of like solve those problems. A lot of times you start to think outside of the box. It's no longer like, oh, okay, so process A to B, and then I need to then put this solution there. But instead of that, can we just take away B and then just automate some of this part based on the tools that we already have? So these are some of the things.
So if you think about people coming up in their career, right? So obviously, we have people graduating with degrees every day and entering in the tech space. So how would you mentor or advise people who are moving into tech space? Obviously, learn AI, everyone's going to say. But I mean, I don't like, would you just say that? Like, just go learn a technology? I don't feel like that's your approach. So how would you mentor them about a career in tech?
Yeah. That's an interesting one because the advice that I would have given upcoming developers or technologists 10 years ago would be very different today. I think one of the messages that I would give them is don't get hung up on a technology stack. Don't get too attached to technologies just because it is something that you have learned, and then something that is in your first job that you're assigned doesn't mean that that technology stack is going to stay on forever. I mean, it used to be you can do Oracle implementations and then it will last you decades. But nowadays, the shelf life of technology is getting lower. And one of these is especially, but when you're actually doing that with that technology, make sure that you are really good at it. I mean, just spend the time and be really good at it within a reasonable time frame. When we say reasonable time frame, as in what, half a year, 1 year, and then you start to then have that thinking of not just solving the problem with that technology, but what else that technology can do. So as you do that, but the more important thing is that during this time, and why I say do not get hung up on just the technology, is actually the business acumen, because the why of you are actually doing it, right? And then learn the business, because if you know the business, or at least the processes, you will find that over time you can go from one industry to the next. I mean, they have wildly different objectives or products that they sell or problems that they solve. But at the end of the day, you will find that processes are actually quite similar, or at least it's transferable.
So I 1,000% agree with you. And I think we've all run across these people who are just pure techies. They just love tech and they want to be in tech and they could really care less about what the business is doing. They're just like, oh, you want a button? Let me give you a button.
Mm.
And I'm gonna give that button all these kind of powers, right? But as a technologist, I think I've seen it personally, but this idea of how the business works. Do you feel like being a technologist who understands how the business works gives you more leverage in your career in terms of having those conversations on either a business leader and kind of walking them through that vision, as well as being able to say to the technology team, guys, like, here's the application. This is why you said it a couple of times, the why we're doing it. So do you feel like that's helped you be more successful?
Definitely, because your worldview changes when you are exposed to different passions and different things that you do, and your energy is actually very different when you go into a presentation with C-level executives, right? You go in as an IT, then you'll be like, okay, here's my 120 slide deck that I'm going to present to you, and I start reading. Or you go in and then you start with a story, or even if something that you encountered during the weekend that you this project, and then you go in and you say, okay, so as a conservationist or as a marine biologist, right, and this is what we have actually seen before. Or then you go in with a persona kind of presentation. You go in and you speak to the C-level and say, okay, you as an executive, this is what it looks like in a day of your work, right? Having this kind of different exposures gives you the confidence and also the sort of like the flow that you have the energy. And it's not something that you can just teach. It is something that you sort of like, because you have already done all these things. And then you go in and then you have that passion around you, right? People will sense that you are interested in solving their problem, not just selling them another solution. I mean, even though if it is internal IT, it's similar, right? You go in and then to your point, definitely it helps.
As the new technology evolves, go through any of the lists of the new technologies, what's kind of exciting you about technology now? Like, what's the new frontier that you're exploring or thinking about or learning? You're a lifelong learner, so what's kind of out there?
Yeah, I mean, if I am to be sort of like honest here, it's like in the last uh, a year or two, I mean, things have moved so fast. In the past, we are talking about like even for the coral mappings and stuff like that, right? We are talking about like, okay, brute force. We have all this fleet of drones, and then we go out and then we start mapping, and then we get this data, and then we analyze it. And suddenly now you have all these AI technologies that come in where you can then do, I mean, in the past we call it machine learning. And then we have tons of people who are then sitting there sort of tagging different things, and which we actually did as well when that was upcoming. And now you have models that's already built, and then we can say, like, hey, analyze this, and then give me a rundown or a summary of the different types of species based on a certain, and then it just spits it out, right? So I'm actually working with my partners right now to sort of like find ways and also mature the platform to then scale up how we can help. And this is actually when we translate this into what we are doing as a business or as consultants, and that translates into working with different partners and also looking at platforms to then how we can help businesses better.
Yeah. So one of the tenets that I want to bring to this podcast and to the listeners, the millions of people who will be listening to us, is practical advice. And I want people to be able to take away not only the amazing advice you've given and your story and how you've navigated your career and the success you've had, but what practical advice can people think about? Like, so when it comes to technology or addressing challenges, like, what should people really be thinking about? What should they be addressing and leveraging technology to do?
Yeah, I think I have brought up quite a few times during this discussion of ours, right? I think the emphasis here is always start with the why and the problem statement, pain points, the people who are actually going through or who are going to be then using that technology instead of just chasing after the next shiny trend. And then I always say this, right? The technology implementation without business process transformation. It's just a system up. It's like it's just a fancy new system that then you're trying to mold into an archaic or outdated process. And then the other key point here is actually change management. It has to start way before the project even kick off. That means whoever who is in the business needs to know and have a strategy on how do we then move from an earlier system to a new system. And this is very important, where I see a lot of companies fail or projects fail because of that.
Yeah. So the driving force behind how technology enables business and conservation has been a theme as well we've explored tonight. Like, talk a little bit about, like, as we kind of wrap up, about what that driving force is like.
Usually the reason to then have some technology implemented into a business is usually the question that comes up, right? Is they try to scale. They want to scale better, faster. They want to do more with less. And that sometimes also is a bit reactive as well, because then you have some who are coming up and then they're doing it faster than you, cheaper than you, and you need to innovate as well. So then it is the driving force is always being like, okay, so I have all these threats, I have all this scalability and all these opportunities coming in. What is the value of this tech investment that will be able to bring to the table? A lot of times they always focus on the cost, right? Okay, this is going to cost 5 million to do. This is going to be cost 10 million to do it in 3 million kind of thing. But that's moot, right? Because at the end of the day, if that solution can help you scale your business 3x, then that discussion about the cost is basically moot. Similar to sort of like getting the right people in your organization. It's always the value impact of how technologists or a transformation specialist will be able to bring to the table as well. Because then you have these experts who have gone through, seen all these failures and stuff like that, and then all the pain, experience the pain, right? And you have this kind of a value-based kind of discussions, and I think that will drive a lot of the discussions.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I really believe that as businesses, they're not really connected. Me and a really good friend used to always say the hip bone's connected to the leg bone, right? I know the hip bone isn't literally connected to the leg bone, but I don't know all the bones in the body, so that's what we said. But it's this idea that value you're driving, right? So you get somebody looking at cost and saying the cost $3 million. Okay, but if it brings you 40 million, was the 3 million worth it? And I think all the things we've kind of discussed here and all the things you've kind of explored in your career is, yeah, but it's this, right? It's bringing those things together in a way that the human impact is really felt through the technology. That, again, as we kind of started this conversation, is technology is the enabler, right? But the connections we're making as humans through this technology, whether it be through your conservation and mapping oceans or diving down and looking at sharks, or, connecting the business units together to sell more, market more, new more, however the life cycle is you're in, it really does kind of all fall down to this process of bringing us together to achieve more, to do more, and that technology kind of being that underlying layer.
Totally agree with that, 100%.
Yeah. Well, listen, I've taken way too much of your time, and I appreciate you joining us. Will be many more conversations with you about many more topics, but I think that people will really get a lot out of your story, and we really just appreciate you taking the time to share it with us.
Looking forward, to more sessions like this, and thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks. We'll talk soon. And so that's a wrap of the episode of Business Uncomplicated. I want to give a big thanks to Ken for taking us on the journey with him and showing us what it really means to build with intention. I think his story is proof that technology isn't about the next feature or the next fanciest tool. It's about the impact it creates and the people it empowers. So if you're a leader out there and wondering where to go with your next tech journey, let it be a reminder. You don't just ask what the tool does. You ask what it enables and what problem you're solving. It aligns with your values, your people, your purpose, and it's where the magic happens. We've got more episodes coming, like in deep dives from actionable strategies from guests who aren't afraid to challenge the norms and do business better. If this conversation hits home, do us a favor, share this with somebody who's drowning in systems who could use a little clarity, leave us a review and subscribe to our channel and continue to listen for more episodes. Business Uncomplicated is really about smart strategies, simple solutions, and serious growth. And we'll see you next time.